I found a random stash of Crayolas and from another brand called Crazy Art, but basically two cheap colored pencil brands, and I have quite the handful of them, like a nice tub of both, and they're pretty, well, I can't say new because honestly, I can only imagine that the last time I bought them and used them was probably 10 years ago. So I was quite surprised when I found this huge bunch, and they're full sticks as well. So they've barely been used. They haven't been sharpened to the nub yet. So I'm gonna be using them today for this portrait, sort of like a portrait study, and honestly just compare them to the other brands of pencils that I have. So I have experience with Prismacolor, Faber-Castell Polychromos, as well as Caran d'Ache. Those are my three most used brands, but I'm most familiar with, I'd say, Polychromos and Prismacolor. I'm really excited to see how well these do, and honestly, my set is kind of incomplete. I don't have the full, or at least I don't think I do. They're just so random and I haven't counted how many I have either. So I might be limited when it comes to being able to capture certain tones, skin tones, and shades. I'm not too sure. So we're just gonna see how well this goes, and honestly, you can be the judge of how well these do and how they perform, because I have no idea. I will try my best. Hopefully these work out and the complete or the final product is going to be okay. I'll be talking about my experience with them as well as walking you through how I use them in this portrait. So I'll be talking about my process. So as usual, I always start with the darkest area of the portrait, or at least where the area that I'm working on, and it is the eye. So I'm lining and I'm defining the shape with this black Crayola. This didn't surprise me, but the Crayola isn't as saturated as I'm used to with my other brands of colored pencils. They actually came out pretty light, but that was just the initial layer. So after multiple layers, I do get to a pretty decent value, so that doesn't bother me at all actually. But the lead of this pencil reminds me of the Polychromos because of how they have this sort of dry texture to it. It's kind of, well, it's not hard to explain, but it's definitely not a Prismacolor texture where it's soft and kind of creamy. This one feels dry, but I actually prefer this texture because this way you'll be able to capture smaller details, so when you sharpen it, it comes down to a really sharp point. So you see me using the color brown from Crayola, and then now I'm using the color red on top. So these pencils, they're not exactly blendable, but you can sort of fake the illusion of them blending by just layering the colors on top, and in the end you'll get some sort of blend, I guess. And so far I don't have any complaints about that because that's the method that I use anyways. So now I'm moving on to the color Tan, also by Crayola, and I'm going to be working on the base color of the eye. So I'm layering down a pretty generous amount, and then I'm going back with the brown to layer on top. So layering is pretty good with these pencils. You don't develop like the wax bloom that you could experience with Prismacolors or wax-based pencils. So these ones, I don't think they're wax-based. I think they're more towards the oil-based. However, don't quote me on that because I haven't searched up these pencils at all. I'm just using them straight up. I'm also curious if the formula of these pencils have changed over the years because these are super old for sure. So I don't know if the recent pencils, their formula has changed where they're softer or if there's any difference, but I guess that gives me the idea that I should go out and get some more since they are, well, from what I last remembered, to be affordable. And now you see me using the first Crazy Art colored pencil in the color Peridot. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm going to be using this as the brighter part of the eye color, and then I'm switching to the color Coral, also from Crazy Art. So the difference between the two is that Crazy Art feels even more dry compared to Crayola, and it's just, well, definitely for that one, it's not as saturated as Crayola, so it takes a little bit more time when you want to layer down like a solid base of color. It feels kind of scratchy, that type of lead. So I'd say that Crayola is a little bit more smoother when you're laying down the colors. So now I'm just working on the eyelashes. There's lashes that appear here as well as a shadow that's casted in this corner of the eye. I'm gonna start with a nice layer of black Crayola first. Create these really thin strands of eyelashes, and that's what I enjoy the most about these pencils, is that you can capture these small details that remind me of the Faber-Castell Polychromos. And you can see those lines are so thin, but I think they're going to be covered up later on because those lashes aren't actually very visible once I finish with this area. So now I'm just gonna go along and keep on drawing those eyelashes. So normally if I was to use my Prismacolors or Polychromos, by this stage the color would be really saturated. Oh, actually, now I'm going in with another color called Raspberry Rave by Crazy Art, and I think this is a good base layer or undertones for the shadow that's going to appear, since this is where the eyelid is, so there's going to be skin that appears, but I want it to be a smooth transition rather than an abrupt one between the darkness of the shadow and then the skin color that appears later on. So anyway, back to comparing it with the Polychromos. So Polychromos, for sure, it doesn't take that many layers compared to the Crayola. Like, you can just pretty much get a base layer done within 1 or 2 layers, but for this one it's probably 5 or 6. It gives you more room to be able to layer on more colors. So now I'm using the color Yellow Orange by Crayola, and I'm just going over the skin that's gonna appear here. Raspberry Rave by Crazy Art. This is the scratchy pencil texture that I was talking about. It takes a little bit more time to make it even or have an even layer. And then I'm going on with a brown Crayola just to get everything mixed together. You can actually layer quite a lot with these pencils, which was surprising. And then I'm gonna darken everything with a black Crayola. So if I was to have a choice, I would probably get a set of Crayola instead of the brand Crazy Art. I did notice that the Crazy Arts were on sale for 50 cents a pack, which is a pretty good deal from their usual price of $1, and that comes in a set of 12. However, if you can get Crayola, then you should do so. I don't remember this color exactly. It could either be the Crayola Mahogany or the Crazy Art Wildfire color, but you can use either. And now I'm going in with the color Toasted Toffee by Crazy Art. This color was really useful because it's a nice chestnut type of color, and I'm going to be using it for the skin color of the eyelid. I'm mixing on top with a yellow orange by Crayola just to not have it be too dull of a color and make it more bright. Now I'm going back with the color Mahogany from Crayola just to layer on top as well. There was a certain formula that I discovered while coloring the skin, but I'm gonna repeat it afterwards. And now I'm going on with a color called Coffee Beans from Crazy Art. So one thing I noticed is that the names of the colors from Crazy Art is much more fun and creative compared to Crayola, so that's an upside. Next is Raspberry Rave from Crazy Art. I'm adding a little bit more details in the eye because right now it's just a solid yellow or brown type of color, so it's better to start with a light base and then add in your details with darker colors on top by using that raspberry color or a black Crayola on top. Throughout this process, I keep on trying to darken the black with the Crayola, but honestly, it was a pretty useless step. It wasn't necessary since it isn't going to change. That's as dark as it's ever going to get unless you use another pencil. So now I'm drawing in the crease of the eye with the Raspberry Rave from Crazy Art, just defining the crease, and then I'm going in with a black Crayola to shade in the shadow that's going to appear here later on. And I'm using the black to just line the lash line, or just shade that in so I know where it starts and where it ends on the eye. I'm just adjusting the skin tone by using the color Tan from Crayola, or actually this is Toasted Toffee by Crazy Art. Those are a little bit similar. Anyway, I'm back to the lashes, so now I'm just drawing each and every individual strand just so I don't lose it later on, or at least the position of the eyelash once I shade the skin color in. Using the color Raspberry Rave again for the shadow that's going to continue on this part of the eye. I'm mixing the two colors together, Raspberry Rave and black from Crayola. I'm gonna try my best to achieve the same tones between those two shadows there, so hopefully they end up looking close. Now I'm trying to connect the two shadows together, and so far they are looking pretty close in color. Now I'm gonna be drawing in that reddish shadow in the corner of the eye. it's pretty dark, so I'll first use the color Mahogany from Crayola as the base layer, and then eventually I'll move on to darkening it with the Raspberry Rave or the black from Crayola. I'm using the color Toasted Toffee from Crazy Art to transition from the shadowed area to the skin color of the eyelid. So it's gonna have to match with the other section of the skin. I'm drawing the eyelashes again, just so I don't lose them. It's important to keep your pencils sharp for this step, just so you don't end up with chunky, thick lines when you don't need them. Now you get to see the color Wildfire by Crazy Art. It's close to the color Mahogany, so I don't think it's necessary to have this exact color. And I'm just trying to add some tones, some different tones to the shadow in this corner here. And I'm going over with the Raspberry Rave. That color turned out to be very useful in this portrait. And I'm not sure Crayola has a color similar to that one, because, yeah, it's hard to describe it. It's called Raspberry Rave, which I think is hilarious, so I don't know what's a good dupe for that one in a Crayola set. I'm back to using the color Toasted Toffee for the skin tone again, and this time I'm just coloring in between the lashes. Normally I would color in the skin tone first and then draw the eyelashes on top, but because this is a cheaper brand of colored pencils, I wouldn't be too sure how well the black would do on top of the skin tone, if it would be dark enough to even like penetrate the color of Toasted Toffee, since I'm gonna be layering on a lot of colors. So I was worried that if I finished drawing the skin first and then draw the eyelashes on later, it might not be dark enough and it would barely show up. So this time around I'm gonna have to just color the skin around the hair so the eyelashes, they don't disappear in the process. Now I'm changing the tone of the skin with the color Yellow Orange from Crayola. I'm using the color brown to darken this section of the skin altogether. So there seems to be a pattern when coloring the skin. I'm using Toasted Toffee as the base, going over it with the Yellow Orange from Crayola, then going over it with the color Mahogany, and then finally coloring it with or darkening the color with the color brown from Crayola. Now I'm working on this flesh colored part of the eye, so I'm going in with this pink color from Crayola as the base layer. Then on top I'm using the color red, also from Crayola, just to decrease the pink and by mixing these two colors together. And finally I'm using the color peach from Crayola just to make it, well, basically peachier and not as red as it was before. Lining at the bottom of the eye using the color light brown from Crayola, and I'm just using this as a placeholder color, not exactly trying to color this whole entire area. Then I'm using the color Coral, also from Crazy Art, and going to begin to also use it as a placeholder in this area just to set something down, because sometimes the white of the paper is a little intimidating and you just need to block it out. Then I'm using the color Tan for this area over here, and I'm using the color Coral from Crazy Art for this front part of the eye. And since it's a little bit too pink, I have to layer the color Tan on top. So this part of the eye was a little bit confusing. As you can see, there's a lot of details that's happening in this section. There's shadows, and then eyelashes, the strands, the shadow of the eyelashes as well. So it's a lot to capture, and I'm starting with the Toasted Toffee from Crazy Art as the base layer, and then I'll work my way with the details later on. But just trying to capture the base color of this section alone is a little bit confusing. I'm going over these areas with the mahogany color from Crayola just to add more shadows since it might have disappeared earlier. I'm brightening up this bottom lash line of the eye with a red Crayola. This part was a little bit too pink, so I had to layer the brown on top just to make it more in shadow since it is the inner corner of the eye. Then I'm using the color Coral for this front part of the eye, and I switched to tan to change the tone of that area. Now I'm going to start with some of the details, so I'm drawing on the faint lashes with the color Mahogany from Crayola. I'm using the color Pink again to set as a base layer for the bottom part of the eye, and I'm going over it with the color Mahogany from Crayola. Then I'm using the color Toasted Toffee from Crazy Art to make this area more neutral since it's looking a little bit too pinky and bright. And then now I'm going to start with the shadow that appears in this corner. So once again, I'm gonna have to match this shadowed area with the top part that you can see is already almost close to being finished. So I have to darken it to that extent eventually, but the Raspberry Rave is always a good starting point or base layer. Going over the Raspberry Rave with the Mahogany, and right after that I'm back to the Raspberry Rave color. To blend these two areas together and make it not as such a abrupt transition between the two, I'm gonna be layering the Raspberry Rave in between the orange tint or the orange skin tone, and then go over it with the Mahogany color just to have a sort of gradient thing going on. So I'm going back and forth with Mahogany. Now I'm using the color brown to darken the orange skin tone because it was a little bit too orange. And I'm just mixing in between brown from Crayola and yellow orange. Since the light source of this reference photo is the sun, so the skin tone is going to have a more golden look to it, but we don't want to overdo the orange. Going in between with the color mahogany, and then I'm making sure to color on top of the shadow, on top of the purple as well, just so it looks like it's going to blend seamlessly throughout. I'm going to be filling in the waterline of the eye with the coral color from Crazy Art, and then I'm going to transition to the color tan from Crayola since the white of the paper was showing too much, but we still need this area to be pretty bright. However, obviously we're not going to let the paper show through. You can see me with these two pinks from Crayola, so that's the problem of having two different sets bought at two different times, or maybe it's just those, maybe I bought at the same time, but those two are inconsistent. So this has happened before with me and Prismacolor, so it's not too much of a surprise, but those two pinks are very different from each other. One is much lighter than the other, however I am using the lighter of the two. Now I'm going to connect the top shadow with the bottom, so I was using Raspberry Rave, and now I'm using the same formula that I used before. I'm going with the mahogany on top, and then finally layering the black as the final layer. The connection is doing pretty good so far. It doesn't look like those two colors are too different from each other. The top is looking a little bit darker though, but because I was going over it so many times with a black colored pencil, that is expected, and I haven't really finished the bottom shadow just yet. So I'm still trying to blend the skin tone and the shadow together using this mahogany from Crayola. These are where, this area is where the eyelashes is going to appear, so it's definitely not white lashes, so I'm gonna have to fill in this area with the yellow orange from Crayola, and then I'm going to be darkening it a little bit using the brown from Crayola. I'm gonna finish filling in all the white of the paper that's still showing through with the yellow-orange color. Then I'm going over with the color Toasted Toffee. Then I'm switching to the brown from Crayola. I'm using the color Mahogany from Crayola again to redraw the eyelashes because they have been lost through the skin coloring process. This part was probably the most confusing to capture because you can see, based on the reference photo, there's just so many lines and you don't know where the shadows are, which one's the shadow, which one's the strand of eyelash. So it was a little bit tricky to work in this area, and I'd say that it's probably the hardest part of this portrait since it's not very straightforward. Through time and by drawing on the eyelashes, it made sense eventually. And you can see in the corner I drew sort of like these lines with a darker colored pencil to create the illusions of lashes, the orange lashes that sort of appear. Now I'm continuing the shadow towards the bigger patch of shadow that's going to eventually show up, and I'm using the Raspberry Rave and the Mahogany, and eventually I'm gonna go over it with the black Crayola once again. So those were the three core colors that I used to create the purple looking shadow. I got through the hardest part, which was trying to capture the lashes on the bottom, so this one, I guess it shouldn't be too bad in comparison. So I'm just using the color Toasted Toffee as the base, and then I'm going over it with the yellow orange and the red from Crayola, just to have a transition between that area to this bottom area here, which is kind of split by the shadow. The shadow was cut in a very sharp way, so trying to connect those two areas together and have a gradient. Working on the details of the eye, I'm using the color brown from Crayola, and this is a perfect time to add in the smaller details on top of the lighter color. So you're able to draw in and create really cool effects to the eye by going in with the dark on top of the light. So having a lighter base layer is really useful and is just a better process than to draw on the details and then color in between. That was only an exception for the bottom, or actually the top part of the eye where the lashes were, but for the eye color it's better to start off light and then work to dark. There's another chunk of skin in this corner, so I have to be able to have a smooth transition from the bottom of the eye to the outer corner. So now's the fun part where I'm gonna color in the white part of the eye. I'm using the color Gray Mist from Crazy Art as the first base. I'm trying to capture a neutral color that's going to be in this area, since it looked really unnatural when I just left it plain white where the paper was showing. Coloring the white of the eye was my favorite part of this eye in general, because just trying to capture or trying to create a color in between the gray mist and the peach in order to achieve this tone of off-white shade in the eye. I thought it was the most challenging, but it turns out that those two colors worked pretty well, since this eye is more, or at least the white of the eye is in shadows, so you'd want it to be a little bit darker, but you don't want the gray to be overpowering where it just looks way too gray in that eye and makes it look unnatural. So this turned out to be the best combination of colors for that section. beginning the transition between the dark crease of the eye to the skin tone that appears here. So I'm using the color yellow orange as the base layer in this area, and right now it looks way too, the contrast between the two is a lot, so we're gonna have to try to minimize that and make the transition look more seamless, since the crease of the eye is really dark, so we have to match that area between the two. And then I'm going in with a mahogany, and I'm gonna be layering on top of that yellow orange color just to try to match the tone between the two areas, since I did use the mahogany to transition out of the crease earlier. Then I'm gonna use the color brown from Crayola to darken this whole area of the skin tone as well. Area is almost finished, and it's starting to match with the bottom part of the eye, so I also have to make sure that those two areas look similar, and I'm gonna continue with this patch of skin to match it with the left side. So I'm going in with the yellow orange first, and then the mahogany. this was the general idea of what it's like to use Crayolas, at least for my experience, and I'll let you be the judge of what you think how the end result looks, because so far I find them to be very easy to use, and even with the limited amount of colors that I had, and some colors could be missing from my set, I still didn't find too many issues. However, since there is a lack of the color brown, or at least the range in brown, all I had was the color brown and light brown from Crayola. I had toasted toffee and coffee beans from Crazy Art. Those four was pretty much it, and if I didn't have Crazy Art, then I would be only using the two from Crayola. With mixing, you're able to extend the range pretty good enough, and that required some of the colors like orange and mahogany from Crayola. So I think that I really enjoyed these pencils, and I might use them again in the future because they were a lot of fun to work with. And honestly, in terms of it not being that saturated, you can just add on more layers and eventually you'll get to the value that you need. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't a challenge after some time or along the process, because you learn certain formulas and combinations that work, and it wasn't difficult at all to navigate these combinations to achieve certain tones. After this portrait, I might just use them again until I run out, since having these pencils lay around would be a waste considering their potential in creating artwork. Forward to the next section that I'm gonna be working on. I'm probably gonna make an even more in-depth and slower tutorial than this one, because this one was more of a first impressions just to see how it looks, and I wasn't sure, because if it didn't look too good, then honestly I would have scrapped the artwork and it would have never seen the light of day. But because I'm quite satisfied and happy with the outcome, I'm just going to continue, and I'm gonna make more tutorials using Crayola.